So when it comes to having a good marriage, there's definitely one skill that you absolutely need to have.
This is the Truth Pop Podcast with Jake and Cathy, a Catholic take on faith and culture. Be sure to subscribe.
Welcome to another episode of the Truth Pop Podcast. I'm Cathy.
And I'm Jake.
We're a married couple helping you to live out your faith in modern day society. We've been married for 6 years. Can you believe it?
Time flies when we're having fun.
This July, we're celebrating our 6th year anniversary.
Yeah, July 14th, the feast day of St. Kateri Tekakwitha. She was definitely the patron saint of our marriage.
Absolutely.
Encouraging you to check out our brand new website, truthpop.net. You can get the podcast there. And also our brand new Christian music station, which is streaming 24/7, again, online at truthpop.net. This has been a really fun marriage series that we've been doing, babe. Almost like a month and a half ago now, I think we started talking about dating and, progressed into Catholic engagement, what that looks like. And now we're ready to dig into effective marriage tips and what does it look like to have a solid Catholic marriage where both spouses are happy, because that's important and you want to have a good marriage, whether you're married now or whether you hope to be someday. What are some practical tools and tips that you can put into your relationship? And so in this episode, Cathy and I want to talk to you about a really important skill. We're going to focus on communication. Just going to spend this entire episode looking at 4 different ingredients of solid and effective communication and what that can look like for you.
You know, we both used to think that we were really good communicators before we got married.
I do have a communication degree.
Yeah, there you go. But, you know, when it came to expressing like our raw emotions, that was not always easy. And we actually had to learn how to communicate well with each other and what that meant and what that looked like. So we found that 4 different skills have really helped our communication. So the first skill that really helped us is having self-awareness. So being aware of my thoughts and my feelings are really important, because I have to know what they are before I can even express that. Sometimes I'll have, insecurities and things that really bother me. And if that goes unchecked, sometimes that can come out in the way that I interact with Jake. And sometimes, I'll be really stressed and I'll just blow up at Jake unintentionally. And if I'm not actively reflecting about my thoughts and where that's coming from, that can really affect our marriage.
One of the things I tend to do is stuff emotions, because I think that throughout a lot of my life, I've been, really intentional about trying to be positive, right? And trying to like always look at things optimistically. But I think I have found in marriage, sometimes if you're not expressing at least some level of discomfort or just, me sharing, okay, I had a bad day and here's what happened. And I think we learned very early on, the first couple of years of marriage, babe, is that I felt like I wasn't allowed to talk about those negative things. And that was really showing a lack of self-awareness on my part, because I wasn't really aware of what was being really stuffed deep below the surface. And so, like you said, that had the opportunity to come up and rear its ugly head and create even greater senses of conflict, which I was trying to avoid in the first place. So just really being honest and aware of how I'm feeling and just being open about it and learning to communicate that, I think, is something that we need to give the space to allow ourselves to do.
Yeah, I definitely think like counseling has really helped me with that. Like going to counseling and kind of uncovering those deeper wounds, those lies that I have believed since childhood. For example, I used to believe like if I wasn't doing a good job with like work or with a certain role, that I was worthless. And I would, during times of my life, I would go on living like believing that I was worthless because I didn't feel I was doing a good job. And once I uncovered that and realized like, no, this is a lie that's coming from my childhood, from wounds, it really has helped me. And I've uncovered so many different lies about myself, through counseling and through Jesus's healing. And that's just helped our communication so much, because once I recognize where that's coming from, I can, be honest about how I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. And then once you understand that's where, that's how I'm feeling and that's where it's coming from, I think you're able to have more empathy for me in a way. Like you're like, oh, okay, this is where it's coming from. Like, so I feel for you.
Yeah, I think self-awareness is about having heart awareness, knowing the state of your heart. And so if we're only focused on the exterior side of communication, like what am I saying out loud vocally, that's only half of, that's probably less than half. I think really we have to dig deep into our heart. What's the inner depths of our heart crying out? And does it need to be addressed? Have there been senses of trauma? Have there been lies, like you said, or inner vows?
Yeah.
And I myself, like I went to counseling for a while and worked with a great counselor who helped me to also uncover a lot of those things that I was believing about myself. And when we follow that false narrative in our life, we tend to say things. We tend to live a life that's contrary to the life that Christ wants us to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say like daily journaling and prayer can really help with building that self-awareness. And when I bring it up to you, Jake, and after I kind of reflect and talk about it with God and pray about it, I think I'm able to understand it a lot better. And then when I share it with you, you're able to help me understand it even better because you have a different perspective than I do.
So self-awareness is so important. It's the first ingredient that we're focusing on. And I think another element of self-awareness is knowing not just yourself, but knowing where you come from with your family. So we briefly touched on this point in the engagement episode, but family of origin has been really crucial for us to uncover because there's no right or wrong way of family upbringing. I mean, unless there was serious abuse, which I pray that there wasn't, most of the time, the way that you were raised was just one good way. But when you marry someone else, their family structure is going to be a lot different. And it might be simple things like, we make sure that we make the bed every morning. And it's these little things that can oftentimes, if unaddressed, cause conflict in the marriage. So uncovering where you've come from and what your expectations are in your present or future marriage, you need to be honest, like, okay, these are my expectations. What are yours?
Yeah. And even when you recognize where you come from and your family of origin, it's important to remember that you're in a new family once you marry your spouse.
Yeah.
And you can create a new family of origin. Because I know with my family, like, we kind of wear a heart on our sleeve. We just express ourselves. Like, we just don't really think about it. We just say like, oh, this is how I'm feeling.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes there can be like more conflict or tension because everything's just all out in the open, but it doesn't matter because shortly after, like, we're moving on to the next thing. So like, that's one thing that you had to get used to with me, where you weren't used to like experiencing that like negative emotion.
I was used to just like, saying, okay, I'm not going to say this out loud. It's not worth being said. But again, going back to my original point, like I had to give myself permission to say those things I didn't always want to say because even if it was, conflict oriented, it actually helped to better resolve the conflict in the long run. So taking the best from each family, taking what you really liked from your family of origin and, maybe letting go of the not so great parts and then blending it with your spouse's best aspects of family of origin. Like you said, then you can really create your own family of origin and just go from there.
So the second thing that has really helped our communication is vulnerability. So being able to share those deep parts of myself with Jake, which is not always easy. Jake vowed to love me in sickness and in health and what are the
good times and the bad.
In the good and the bad. And sometimes there's bad. There's bad parts. There's been so many wounds that have been dug up since we've been married. And I've had to share that with you. And that's hard to share that with one person, to share the worst parts of yourself and the best parts. But being vulnerable is so important to a marriage, because if you're not vulnerable to your husband or wife, you're just roommates. You're not intimately connecting emotionally. And that's so important in a marriage.
It's basically like the anti-social media, because we have the highlight reel, only the good parts of ourselves on Facebook. And I think we tend to convince ourselves that we need to make sure that we find someone who is going to be really impressed by my really good parts of my life. But we don't really think about our spouse finding out about the really bad stuff too. And I think maybe sometimes once our spouse uncovers those deep, hidden, shameful parts of our past, we want to run away. Or maybe that's where there's temptation for divorce, because we think that our spouse isn't going to accept us. I think it's a matter of turning to Jesus and receiving his love and mercy that he has for us. And once we've really encountered the mercy that he wants to pour out for you, we realize that there's no sin that can't be forgiven. And once we've experienced Christ's mercy in our own lives, then we're able to meet our spouse's vulnerability with love and help them in their shame, help them to heal, and tell them that you are not going to leave, that you are there for the long run.
And it can be really uncomfortable to bring up things, especially things you don't want to talk about, things you want to just sweep under the rug.
Yeah, right.
There's been times where I've had to literally force myself to talk to Jake about things I don't want to talk about, but I know we have to, because it's really important for our marriage.
This is going to get into our third ingredient, which is respect. But it may be worth saying this now, that I think sometimes when you're sharing something that is very vulnerable, or you're pushing yourself to have an uncomfortable conversation, I think it is okay to set a time limit or to take a break, because you can only share so much to the point that maybe you just feel emotionally exhausted. Like it is okay to talk to your spouse and say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, let's talk about something really difficult. And then after that 5 minutes is done, you agree that you're just going to pick it up again another time. Or if, tensions are really high and you find yourself more likely to say something in the current moment that's you're going to end up regretting, that's maybe a time to say, okay, you know what, like I'm just not at my best right now. So I sense there's a lot of vulnerability and there's potential for disrespect. So let's pick this conversation up again, maybe in 30 minutes. But I think you have to say when you're going to pick the conversation up again, rather than saying, oh, we'll get to it again. I think I've made that mistake before, babe, like where I say, okay, like I want to break from this. I don't want to talk about it. And then you're like, okay, well, when are we going to talk about it again? So that's the second element. But you got to have respect. You got to make sure that the conflict that you're discussing is met with a sense of love towards the other person, so that you're not trying to win the argument. You're seeking to understand where your spouse is coming from. You're trying to put yourself in their shoes. And if you're at a point where you just can't do that, maybe that's God saying, okay, I'm going to give you the grace to do that in a half hour, but right now just take a break.
Yeah, I like how you said that. Like, you're not trying to win the argument. Like, oftentimes I've heard sometimes couples will try to look at conflict and let it separate each other. But the truth is that you're a team and the conflict is separate. So you want to tackle the conflict together rather than let it divide you. And one thing that has really helped us is when we are speaking about a topic that can be potentially very emotionally charged, to speak in the I, meaning take ownership of your feelings rather than blaming your spouse for something. So for example, if I'm feeling ignored, I would say I feel ignored rather than you are ignoring me, because that allows you to own that feeling, and you're not blaming your spouse saying, this is you making me feel this way. And I think when your spouse expresses that to you, they express how they're feeling, it allows you to have more empathy for them. So that's the fourth skill or ingredient that can help with communication. One thing that really helps us is something called active listening. So active listening is basically just repeating what the person had just said in more of a summary. So it really helps, especially during like emotionally charged conversations, because it helps that person feel known and seen.
I can remember back to a situation just a month or so ago, babe, where you were struggling and having a tough day. And I was struggling and having a tough day. And I remember saying, oh, you were expressing how you were feeling. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And I said it, the tone that I said it in was not very empathetic. And you could see that. So then, I got upset. I'm like, well, why are you getting upset at me? All I'm saying is I'm sorry. But I think what you were communicating to me was that you needed me to put myself in your shoes in that moment and to try to get outside of how I was feeling and to just, mix in with your frustrations. So yeah, repeating back what you say, just saying, oh, I can understand how you had a really difficult day and all you want to do is just relax right now. And all you want to do is just unplug from the world. And you almost have to just be illustrative with how you're saying.
And you don't have to stay in the eye for active listening. That you can say you because you're repeating back what they had just expressed to you. So it just helps them realize like that they're being listened to and heard. And it's really important to have really good body language too. Like face your spouse, look at them in the eye and have like a look of compassion and just really put yourself in their shoes and be like, wow, I can understand that would be really difficult.
I remember you said it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
The tone really matters. That can go a long way.
And then putting away the distractions, like put away the phones, put away the computers, just really give that attention to your spouse. I
think a temptation for guys when it comes to this, let's just be real. I think guys have a hard time not being Mr. Fix-It. This is something I run into sometimes, babe, where you're talking about a struggle you're having, and I can see that the solution is right there. And so often I'm quick to say, oh, well, just do this. And that drives you crazy. And maybe a lot of women are like nodding their heads yes right now because their spouses do the same thing. And I think it's coming from a good place, ladies. Like, let me just assure you of that. Like, guys are not trying to cause extra conflict. I think guys don't want to stay in the pain. They want to drive forward towards the solution. And I think that's just oftentimes how guys' brains are wired, to where we want to provide for you, babe. Like, you just want to be seen in that pain. And you might even know, that is the solution.
Yeah, it reminds me of that video that we watched in our marriage prep where a woman has like a nail in her head. Yeah. And she's telling her spouse about this pain that she's feeling, this intense pressure in her head. And he keeps saying, just take the nail out of your head. And she's getting so frustrated. She's like, no, you're not listening to me. I just have all this pain and it's right here in my head. And he's like, just take the nail out. And she's like, no, you're not listening to me. And finally he's like, okay, all right, that must be really hard.
Yeah. And I think every single guy can relate to that, where pain can make guys uncomfortable, especially very vulnerable.
It could be hard for women too. I mean, pain is hard for any human being to deal with, to face. It's much easier to just kind of pretend like they're not there, just to kind of sweep under the rug. For the first 24, 25 years of my life, like I thought I was fine. Like I'm like, oh no, like I mean, I didn't think I had any problems, but then after we got married, I'm like, oh wait, I have a lot of problems and I need to deal with them.
Marriage is like a mirror where you see yourself for who you really are, and you really see your soul, you see your heart, and you see that gunk that God wants to heal, he wants to take out, and that could be uncomfortable. And I think in a lot of ways, we're going through that right now. It's just, God's uncovering a lot of gunk from our past, and I think we've learned how patient we have to be with one another through that healing process, because it doesn't always happen at once. For me, I can say that one of the best ways to grow is just by sitting in front of our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament and letting him just pull out that gunk. And I feel like the more he's doing that, the more he's giving me an empathetic heart. And he's helping me to realize the problems that you're going through. One thing that has helped us both, I would say, is reaching out to other people that we know are struggling so that we ourselves as a married couple can be a source of empathy and love for those who feel like they don't have anyone in their lives. And the more we practice empathy, the more we can get outside of our own pain to recognize the pain that other people are going through as well. But Jesus can meet you in that pain, and he can meet you with whatever you're going through. So don't give up hope. If you feel like you're just fighting a lot with your spouse right now, if you feel like things aren't getting any better, that's okay. Like Jesus he loves the fact that you want to grow in communication, and he's going to give you the tools. Ultimately, this is a matter of grace. So stay close to the sacraments. That's the best way that you can grow in communication.
And also, marriage counseling is such a beautiful tool for couples. Just sitting down with someone and just speaking these things out loud and having somebody to help facilitate and guide you is amazing.
So going over the 4 ingredients then to communication: self-awareness, vulnerability, respect, and empathy. If you just practice those little skill sets of communication, maybe take one a week and just really focus on it and say, God, give me the grace to work on this right now. And yeah, I know I need to work on those other areas too, but I'm just going to focus on this one. And God's really going to help you. And he's just going to make your marriage and communication stronger and just, make you a better person and make you more available to those around you in your life. And we're praying for you. If you ever need any sort of prayer for your marriage, if you're struggling, don't be afraid. Just reach out to us on our website, truthpop.net. Love to connect with you and pray with you there.
This is the Truth Pop Podcast. Fill your faith.